In the quiet corridors of the most exclusive hotel in Washington, D.C., where the walls are polished with money and the silence is curated, she moved like a shadow, present, but never seen. Amara Davis. A black waitress. 29. Graceful in motion, invisible by design. She served the powerful, but no one ever served her. Until one afternoon changed everything. It wasn't supposed to happen. Not there. Not with him. But as world leaders, press teams, and cardinals filled the halls for the high-security Interfaith Global Summit, an unplanned request shattered protocol. Pope Leo XIV, head of the Roman Catholic Church, paused mid-conversation, turned his eyes away from presidents and prime ministers, and pointed toward her. "May I speak to the one carrying the tray?" There was confusion at first. A beat of stunned silence. And then they brought her forward. Amara didn't ask for attention. She didn't seek it. She offered no speech, no petition. Just her presence. The Pope took her hands, weathered from labor, and whispered a short prayer, private, quiet, meant for no stage. But someone saw. Someone who didn't like what they saw. Within the hour, she was summoned. Not with dignity. Not with process. But with fury disguised as order. In a dim back office near the service hallway, Derek Sandhurst, the hotel's general manager, waited with clipped posture and icy restraint. "You spoke to the Pope?" "Yes," she said. "He spoke to me. You embarrassed this institution." "I didn't mean to. Intentions don't matter here. You're fired." There was no warning. No hearing. No exit interview. Just dismissal. A life undone in the space of 5 sentences. But what Derek didn't know, what the cameras missed but a single cell phone caught, was how that moment unfolded. A guest, sitting unnoticed in the lounge, had filmed the entire confrontation. And before nightfall, the video was online. What was meant to bury her, would now reveal her. And the world, so often deaf to quiet suffering, was suddenly watching. Comment where you're watching from. And if this story unsettles you, even a little, and you haven't subscribed yet, what exactly are you waiting for? But if you've made it this far and still refuse to subscribe, then enter the comments and tell us why injustice doesn't move you. Amara Davis had never asked for a spotlight. Her world was built in the margins. Early mornings, aching feet, triple shifts that bled into the next day. She had learned long ago that the most invisible people are often the most essential. She knew how to carry silver trays without sound, how to anticipate needs before a word was spoken, how to vanish the moment a guest lifted their glass. But more than anything, she knew how to keep her dignity tucked quietly behind her uniform, even when the world refused to see her. 29. Black. Daughter of a retired nurse now bedridden from a stroke. Amara worked 6 days a week to keep a roof over their heads and medicine in her mother's drawer. She didn't complain. She didn't ask for applause. She believed in doing good even when no one noticed. But someone did notice. He was nothing like she imagined. Pope Leo XIV had been elected in a time of division. Young for his office, modern in his theology, stubbornly kind in his politics. They called him the People's Pope. He rode buses in Rome. He refused gold rings. He ate with janitors instead of kings. And at this year's Global Interfaith Summit, a gathering of political titans, faith leaders, and media giants, he insisted on staying in a regular 5-star hotel instead of the protected government compound. They warned him it was risky. Uncontrolled. Unpredictable. He called it, closer to humanity. It was the same hotel where Amara served. Where she scrubbed wine glasses until they sparkled like diamonds she'd never wear. The Vatican team booked the presidential suite under a pseudonym, but his presence didn't stay secret for long. By the time the summit began, the lobby buzzed with murmurs, handlers whispered in code, and security tripled. And then he did something no one prepared for. On the second morning of the summit, in the grand dining room filled with diplomats and cardinals, Pope Leo XIV looked away from his plate, locked eyes with a woman in uniform, and simply said, "May I meet her? The one with the careful hands." There was a pause. The maitre d' blinked. The Vatican aide hesitated. But the Pope didn't repeat himself. He didn't raise his voice. He just waited. And so Amara was brought forward. She hadn't done anything special. She hadn't spoken a word. But she approached slowly, unsure of how close to stand, unsure of how to breathe. The room stilled. He asked her name. She told him. He asked how her mother was doing. She froze. How did he know? He smiled and said, "The ones who serve with care always carry someone else's burden." Then, gently, without cameras, without spectacle, he took her hands in his and whispered a blessing. Short. Soft. In Latin. She didn't understand the words, but somehow, she understood the weight of them. That was all. And yet, it was everything. Because watching from the side, with tight lips and cold eyes, stood Derek Sandhurst, general manager of the hotel, a man for whom image was God and protocol was gospel. His suit was always tailored. His sentences always rehearsed. And in his world, deviation from schedule was heresy. To Derek, the Pope's act was not a moment of grace, it was a liability. Unplanned contact. No security clearance. No optics control. No media-ready framing. A spiritual leader connecting directly with staff. It was, to him, an embarrassment. A risk. A stain on the clean image he worked to preserve. And so, within the hour, Amara's name was removed from the shift schedule. Her key card was deactivated. She was summoned, not thanked, not praised, but terminated. Quickly. Quietly. Brutally. But what Derek failed to realize, what he always failed to see, was that the world no longer runs solely on silence and control. Someone had filmed it. Not just the moment of firing, but the lead-up. The trembling in Amara's voice. The condescension in Derek's tone. The way her shoulders sank when he said, "You've embarrassed us," as if human dignity was something you could offend your way out of. And by nightfall, that video, blurry, underlit, crackling with truth, was everywhere. People didn't just see her. They felt her. And for the first time in her life, Amara Davis was no longer invisible. If you believe unseen people matter, hit that subscribe button. And if not, explain in the comments why some people should just stay invisible. The next morning came cloaked in false calm. The kind of stillness that hangs just before a storm. In the service corridors of the hotel, staff moved with lowered eyes and hushed steps. Word had spread, though no one dared to speak it aloud, Amara had been summoned. They didn't call it a disciplinary hearing. They didn't even call it a warning. On paper, it was just a meeting. But in luxury institutions, words are carefully chosen to conceal sharp intentions. And everyone knew, when the manager asked for a private conversation behind closed doors, it rarely ended with mercy. Amara entered the office with her hair pulled back, her posture straight, her hands clasped in front of her. She was not defiant. She was not afraid. But she understood the weight of the room she had stepped into. Derek Sandhurst sat behind his desk with a curated calm, his tie perfectly centered, his watch turned outward, ready to glance at, but never distracted by. He didn't look up immediately. That, too, was calculated. "Miss Davis," he began, after a long pause that felt more like a performance than a greeting. "Thank you for coming." She nodded. "I just want to have a brief conversation about yesterday." "Nothing formal," he said, folding his hands. "We're all just trying to understand." He smiled slightly. The kind of smile that pretends to disarm, but really sharpens the blade. Now, he continued, how did the contact with His Holiness begin? Did you approach him? Amara's voice was steady. No, sir. He called me over. I see. And did anyone give you instructions prior? Any protocols you were made aware of? No, sir. I was serving tea. He asked for me. There was a pause. Derek clicked his pen once. Slowly. Loudly. And when you were with him, did you discuss anything political? Social? Religious? We didn't talk like that, she said gently. He asked my name. He prayed with me. Prayed, Derek repeated. What kind of prayer? I don't know the words. It was in Latin, I think. He nodded again, as if trying to appear thoughtful, but his eyes flicked once to the corner of the room, where the HR director sat silently, taking notes. Miss Davis, Derek said, voice lowering slightly, I hope you understand why we have to ask these things. It's not about you, personally. It's about perception. Optics. We can't have unexpected interactions like this. Especially during a summit of this magnitude. I didn't plan it, she said. I was just doing my job. Yes, but from an administrative standpoint, it places us in a very precarious position. The media is watching. The Vatican is watching. If something had gone wrong, but it didn't, she said, more firmly now. Nothing went wrong. For a second, silence. Derek leaned back in his chair. The momentary shift in her tone had thrown him, not aggressively, but effectively. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't shown anger. But she had reminded him that she was not naive. That small assertion of self, so calmly stated, was the beginning of a crack in his performance. Well, he said slowly, tapping the desk once, the issue is not intention. It's procedure. Amara remained still. There are concerns, he continued, that your presence may have implied a message. Some are saying this could be interpreted as symbolic. That the Pope might be using staff for political optics. I wasn't used, she said. I was seen. It wasn't defiance. It was truth. And it was more than Derek had prepared for. He blinked. Adjusted his cufflink. Searched for another polished question to regain control. But Amara had already done something he didn't expect, she had refused to play small. Her answers were simple. But they unsettled him. Not because they were loud, but because they were grounded. She did not flinch, and she did not apologize for being chosen by grace in a room obsessed with power. She had not cornered herself. He had. And in that subtle shift, the man who had summoned her to discipline began to feel the pressure of exposure, like a mirror slowly being held up to his well-tailored armor. If you think her silence showed strength, subscribe now. And if not, maybe you would have lied too. Let us know below. The room changed. Derek Sandhurst's patience, always more performance than principle, began to peel. The curated calm that defined his management style gave way to something colder, sharper. The pen tapping stopped. The smile vanished. He leaned forward now, elbows on the desk, fingers laced together like a judge preparing a verdict. No matter what you believe about yesterday, he said, voice flatter now, you created a disruption. You breached boundaries. And whether you meant to or not, you inserted yourself into something sacred, and delicate. Amara didn't speak. Not out of fear, but to allow his words to finish cutting themselves. Derek took the silence as an opportunity to press harder. You embarrassed this institution, he said, slower this time, tasting the words. There are people who've spent months orchestrating this summit, managing every guest, every camera, every headline. And then you go and become a story. She looked up, not defiantly, not angrily, but with something more unsettling, clarity. "I didn't become a story," she said softly. "You made me one." The weight of that sentence landed in the center of the room. Even the HR director, silent at the edge, paused in her note-taking. Derek's eyes narrowed. "We don't tolerate insubordination." "Then why ask me questions if the answers don't matter?" His jaw tightened. The edge of his professionalism collapsed. Now his words were weapons, not policies. "You were out of line. You crossed a threshold that should have never been crossed. You exposed this hotel to scrutiny. You may not understand what that means, but I do. This isn't about prayer, Miss Davis. It's about liability." "It was a moment of grace," she said. "You're the one making it dangerous." That did it. He stood up. "This is not open for discussion. Your employment is terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you out. Your final check will be processed by Friday. No warning. No hearing. Just elimination." She stood too, but not in panic. In peace. "You're not firing me because of what I did. You're firing me because I didn't stay small." He didn't respond. He couldn't. The truth had landed. And then, just as she turned to leave, a click. Faint. Barely audible. But enough. In the hallway, unnoticed by them both, a junior employee, one of the dishwashers, had been standing just out of frame, his phone angled toward the office door left slightly ajar. He had seen her enter. He had heard the rising tones. And instinct, perhaps justice, had moved him to press record. What he captured in those 2 minutes would reach 12 million people in less than 48 hours. It was uploaded with no caption. No explanation. Just the image of a black woman being fired by a white man in a suit, for being prayed for by a religious leader. And the internet saw it for what it was. Rage did not trickle. It flooded. Black Twitter lit up first, followed by Catholic reformers, civil rights voices, and workers' unions. The hashtags began trending before midnight. Hashtag I stand with Amara, hashtag fired for faith, hashtag seen by the Pope, erased by power. The world had witnessed too many quiet firings, too many polite injustices. But something about this one, this particular blend of faith, race, and power, ignited more than sympathy. It ignited moral exhaustion. The image of Pope Leo XIV blessing Amara began circulating beside the clip of her being dismissed. And suddenly, every major news outlet was asking, how does one go from being touched by the Pope to being tossed aside like a problem? Commentators began dissecting the footage. Body language experts. Religious scholars. Former hotel employees. Everyone had something to say, but all roads led back to one unavoidable question: why was she punished for being seen? If you believe good people deserve better, subscribe. And if you don't, go ahead, defend the firing in the comments. Let the world hear your reasoning. Inside the walls of the very hotel that had cast her out, behind security lines and Vatican protocol, Pope Leo XIV sat quietly in his private suite. Morning sun spilled through the tall windows, but he sat in shadow, watching. One of his aides had brought him the video. Not out of duty, but conviction. No headlines had yet reached the mainstream, but the clip was already gathering force like a storm just off the coast. The Pope watched it once. Then again. Then in silence. No one spoke. In the video, Amara stood still, unshaken, as Derek dismissed her with practiced cruelty. But what struck the Pope was not just the injustice, it was the stillness in her eyes. Not the stillness of fear, the stillness of someone who had learned how to absorb disrespect without breaking. He leaned forward slowly, his elbows resting on his knees, and whispered something only the aide beside him could hear. We owe her something more than silence. By noon, the Vatican press office had scheduled a rare, unscripted statement. It was to be delivered from the media podium set up for summit briefings. Cameras were invited. Journalists scrambled. Speculation bloomed. When the spokesperson, Cardinal Enzo Salvi, a man known for poetic restraint, stepped to the microphone, the room fell into that rare kind of silence that feels like breath being held. He didn't begin with apology. He didn't begin with blame. He began with a name. Her name is Amara Davis. And she was not seen because she shouted. She was seen because she carried quiet dignity through a room where dignity is usually purchased, not given. A murmur moved through the press pit. His Holiness watched the footage this morning. He recognized her not as an employee, not as a symbol, but as a soul. We do not offer commentary on internal matters of hospitality management, but we do offer one thing, an invitation. Amara Davis is hereby invited, publicly and with joy, to visit the Vatican as a guest of the Holy See. Not for penance. Not for spectacle. But for honor. She was seen. And now, she will be received. A reporter raised her hand. Doesn't this politicize the papacy? Intervene in corporate affairs? Enzo didn't hesitate. The Church does not involve itself in business. But we are very involved in mercy. If kindness is controversial, then perhaps controversy is overdue. No one clapped. Not yet. The room was too stunned. But the ripple began, first in whispers, then in headlines, then in fire. By evening, CNN, Al Jazeera, and La Repubblica led with the same headline, "The Pope Responds." Churchgoers around the globe began sharing their own stories of being unseen, unheard, unacknowledged. Small parish pages posted prayers for Amara. Activist groups in Rome held up signs reading, "Mercy is not a security risk." A choir in Johannesburg dedicated their Sunday service to "the woman the world tried to ignore." In less than 24 hours, she became a symbol not just of injustice, but of being finally, undeniably recognized. And in the middle of it all, Amara, who had no phone for most of the day, who had returned to her mother's apartment and made soup without knowing she'd gone viral, sat quietly on the couch, unaware that the Vatican had just called her by name. If the Pope can stand up for a waitress, why can't we? Subscribe now, and if you wouldn't have helped her, tell us why in the comments. The backlash was not immediate. It was tidal. In the hours that followed the Vatican's public invitation, something deeper than outrage began to spread, a slow, rising wave of reckoning. Not just with what had been done to Amara Davis, but with what her dismissal revealed about the world behind the uniforms and smiles. Outside the hotel, the first protesters appeared just after dawn. They were quiet at first, holding signs that read, "We see you, Amara," and "Hospitality shouldn't humiliate." By midday, they had multiplied. Nurses, priests, bus drivers, hotel workers from other chains. They lined the sidewalk in rows, not chanting, but standing, like she had stood. Dignified. Unmoving. Inside, the staff felt the pressure too. Housekeepers whispered in stairwells. Bellhops began leaking stories to local media. Former employees posted testimonials of other silent firings, quiet threats, veiled racism that now, because of Amara, had a name and a face. The hotel tried to contain it. First with press silence. Then with a vague statement about miscommunications. But it was too late. Truth had already bloomed. And at the center of it all, one man could no longer hold the illusion together. Derek Sandhurst, who once moved through the lobby like a monarch, now entered through side doors, flanked by legal counsel. His confidence had decayed into calculation. His name, once associated with prestige, now trailed hashtags of condemnation. His image from the leaked footage, a man standing above a quiet woman, became the emblem of a power structure cracking at the seams. 3 days after the Vatican's address, Derek submitted his resignation. It was not framed as repentance. It never is in his world. The statement cited an environment of distraction and the need for institutional stability. But behind closed doors, it was clear, he had become a liability to the very system he once controlled. Meanwhile, Amara's life was changing. She had never spoken to the press. She declined interviews. But the Vatican reached out privately, first with apologies, then with opportunity. A full scholarship was offered to study theology and social ethics at the Pontifical Urban University in Rome. Not a public relations move, but a recognition of the moral clarity she had displayed without ever raising her voice. Housing was arranged for her and her mother, first temporary, then permanent. A modest apartment in Vatican-owned property near Trastevere. Paid in full. No strings. And then, the Pope himself spoke again. Not at a podium, not with a spokesman. But in his own words, on his personal social platform, where millions followed his weekly reflections. If compassion cost someone their job, let it cost me too. Because I do not serve to be safe. I serve to be faithful. That sentence was shared across 7 continents in under an hour. The world, long cynical of institutions and gestures, paused. Here was a man who did not posture. Who did not hide behind doctrine. Who had chosen mercy over image, and, by doing so, had multiplied it. Journalists who had long critiqued the Church now called it a rare triumph of conscience. Theologians likened Leo XIV to Saint Francis, unafraid to kneel among the poor. Faith leaders across denominations wrote open letters of support. And for one brief stretch of time, digital spaces, so often loud with insult, grew quiet with admiration. Amara did not celebrate publicly. She simply packed a suitcase, held her mother's hand, and boarded a flight to Rome. Injustice had tried to end her quietly. But grace had lifted her, loudly. If this gave you hope, click subscribe. And if not, why does seeing justice make you uncomfortable? Say it in the comments. The Vatican courtyard was quiet. Not with emptiness, but with reverence. A gentle wind moved through the olive trees. The bells of St. Peter's had just finished tolling. And seated beneath the marble colonnade, beside bishops, monks, and pilgrims from across the world, sat Amara Davis. No longer in a server's uniform, but in a simple ivory dress, her mother beside her, wrapped in a shawl the color of sunrise. There had been no red carpet. No formal procession. Only a humble gathering arranged by the pontiff himself. No journalists had been invited. Only witnesses. And then, from the far archway, Pope Leo XIV appeared. He did not ascend a stage. He walked straight to the middle of the courtyard, where a circle of chairs had been arranged, not a throne in sight. He stood in the center. The wind tugged lightly at his cassock. And he spoke. This is not about her, he began. It's about us. It is about how easily we pass over the ones who carry the world in silence. How quickly we dismiss kindness when it does not come from the powerful. How often we disguise cowardice as order. He paused. Amara Davis did not ask for recognition. She did not demand justice. She simply remained human in a room that had forgotten how to be. He turned to her now, not as an orator, but as a shepherd. And for that, she taught us more theology in one act than some of us teach in a lifetime. There was no applause. Only silence, the kind that holds something sacred. Then, with only a small nod from the Pope, Amara stood. She walked slowly to the center, her hands folded gently in front of her, her eyes steady. She did not speak for long. I was never angry, she said. Not because it didn't hurt, but because I knew who I was before they told me who I wasn't. Forgiveness is not agreement. It's freedom. And I refuse to let anyone take that from me. She looked at the circle of faces around her, priests, janitors, mothers, strangers, and smiled softly. God saw me when no one else did. And when I lost everything, he reminded me. I was never invisible to him. Her voice did not waver. It did not rise. But around the world, people who watched the recorded footage later described it the same way. It felt like healing had a sound. In homes across oceans, in churches and living rooms and street corners, hearts broke open, not from pity, but from conviction. From the deep, quiet ache of knowing how many Amaras have been passed over, and how many are still waiting to be seen. If you believe in rising above pain, join us by subscribing. Still not subscribing? Let the world know what stops your heart from feeling. What would you have done, if you were in that hotel office? Would you have looked at her and seen a problem, or a person? Would you have asked questions to understand, or questions to trap? Would you have stood still in the moment, or stood up for what was right? And what if it were you? What if you were the one being called in, not to be heard, but to be handled? Would you have kept your voice low, like Amara? Or let bitterness speak louder than grace? These aren't questions for someone else. They're for us. For you. Because justice isn't just what happens in Rome or behind closed doors. It's what happens in the quiet decisions, in the anonymous meetings, in the invisible corners of power. And those moments reveal us. So be honest, brutally honest. Go to the comments. Say what you really felt. Did you agree with how she responded? Would you have spoken up sooner? Or do you still think protocol should have come before compassion? We want to hear it. Not because we're looking for the right answer, but because silence doesn't change anything. Dialogue does. And maybe, just maybe, this story did something in you. Maybe it stirred a still place. Maybe it reminded you that the smallest people in the room are often the ones who carry the heaviest truths. So now, ask yourself, quietly, did this change how I see things? Even a little? If it did, hit subscribe. Because Circle of God's Glory shares stories like this every week. Stories that make us confront ourselves. Stories that pull faith into real life. Stories that hold a mirror to power, and a hand to the forgotten. And if you watched all the way to the end without subscribing, what's really holding you back? The comments are open. May we all seek truth with humble hearts.